So this is an informational session about a proposed bylaws revision for Esperanto USA. I'm Brandon Sowers. I'm the president of the board. I'll be presenting it with Quintyn, Bobb, who is the vice president of the board. And this comes from uh, a, a process that the board started in February, where it chartered a bylaws revision committee to look over the bylaws and propose a revision. That committee was myself and Quintyn, as well as David Beck and Fred Meyer. We spent about 10 hours in meetings and a lot of time offline reviewing our current bylaws, reviewing guides from organizations such as the California Nonprofit Association and the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits on recommendations for bylaws. So we'll get into some of the, we'll get into the proposed changes and overview of those changes. I want to be clear that this is an informational session, so we're not asking for any decision making today. This is intended to share information with the membership about this proposal and also get feedback for the board from this discussion. And I want everyone to feel comfortable expressing themselves or asking questions in whatever language is most comfortable for you. So we will be presenting in English because, as Logan mentioned, the bylaws are a document, a legal document for us as a nonprofit registered in the US. But if you have a question and you're more comfortable asking it in Esperanto, please feel free, and we will summarize that as well. Summarize those questions. Q, do you want to move forward?
Absolutely. So we dropped links in the chat just regarding our proposed bylaws and our current bylaws. For those of you who are on your computer, it might just be easier to use a QR code to scan and look at them on your phone. Feel more than free to look at those, follow through with us, and then you'll also, we encourage you to look at these after as well. And these bylaws are currently posted in our bulletin.
Great. So some of the considerations that we had as we began this process were that there's several inconsistencies in the bylaws. It appears that there's probably been, one small change after another over the years, but never any kind of comprehensive review. Some of the specific areas that we ran into are the language on finances doesn't match what the IRS requirements for reporting are and what best practices are from nonprofits for nonprofits. There were some contradictory timelines, unclear expectations of board members and officers, unclear volunteer organizational structure, especially around committees. The current process around bylaws changes doesn't encourage discussion. So the current process is just a bylaws change gets put on the ballot and then it's voted yes or no, up or down. That's something that we took into account with the proposed revision. And overall, we think that this proposed revision will help us to continue to improve our operations and set the organization up for long-term success.
Great. So some of the guiding lights that the bylaws committee used to help steer some of these decisions was we did some research regarding what are the best practices for nonprofits, what is the industry standards, and then we also consulted with an attorney to review them, and if there was anything that stood out to them, we asked them to comment on that. We looked at resources from organizations such as the California Nonprofit Association, as well as the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. As you can guess, there are a lot of resources online for nonprofits, and we utilized some of those, but those two resources that we put on this slide were ones that we drew from most heavily because we believe that they provided a good example of nonprofit structure. And then when thinking about what we wanted the end results of these bylaws revisions to be, we wanted it to be something that was readable, something that reduced complexity, but also allowed a bit more operational flexibility and giving more consistent expectations for things that currently happen. So giving some more guidelines to what our practices have been and sort of changing that into a policy while still enabling us to be flexible and not completely tied down in the event we need to be flexible. So uh, the major changes that we'll discuss during today's presentation um, are listed here. So first and foremost, just thinking about our finances, we wanted to shift them a bit to better comply with IRS regulations as well as industry standards, including we wanted to really be more thoughtful and more consistent with certain terms that we used, as well to be compliant with what the current standards are in the industry. We also referenced additional operating documents, including those mentioned in the current bylaws. So these, I'll discuss these a bit more in depth, but essentially this would allow a bit more flexibility for things like our finances, and also help to further enshrine processes that we currently have, such as when we're thinking about ballots or referendum as well. We updated the role of the director of the central office to, again, just thinking about when we compare our nonprofit to other nonprofits in the United States, what role the director of the central office currently serves, and what would be most helpful for the organization. And then we clarified board meeting procedures and expectations of board member participation and responsibility. We also streamlined the process for annual conferences and our elections. And then, again, something that I'm very excited about, we provided a definition of committee roles and then also outlined some of those expectations, especially as our committees have become more active. I know that's something that we've wanted to really make sure that we have a clear definition of. All right, so we'll hop into our sort of a brief overview of the proposed financial procedures and whatnot. I do want to say that after we present on like each of these sections, we'll pause for a bit just to provide some discussion regarding this so that we can hear it and that you don't have to hold all of your questions towards the end. And yeah, with that, I'll pass it off to Brandon.
Great. One other point I wanted to make, which I forgot earlier, is that we took the current bylaws as our starting point, and we preserved a lot of the language in the current bylaws. Some areas were reorganized in terms of the way that the bylaws are organized, and there were areas where there was some minor wording changes, but a good portion of these proposed bylaws still use the wording of the current bylaws. Okay, so discussing financial procedures, this is something that's very important to us. We want to make sure that Esperanto USA is managing its finances well. You can move to the next slide. So we hired an accountant last fall to review our financial systems. They met with Bill over multiple sessions and just gave an overall review of our financial systems and structure. They came back with several recommendations and pieces of advice for us. One was that they explained that the IRS distinguishes between different categories of funds, being donor-restricted funds, and that's funds which were specifically set up with paperwork showing a restriction from a donor, board-designated funds, and non-designated funds. Board-designated funds are funds that the board sets a specific purpose for, but according to this accountant, a current board setting a restriction can't basically make it harder for a future board to change that restriction. So board designated fund has a specific purpose, but a future board can change that purpose or unrestrict it, or undesignated rather, and non-designated funds. These categories are established in law and reporting. For example, on our IRS Form 990, which we fill out every year, it asks us how much of our money is in donor restricted funds and how much of our money is in non-donor restricted funds. It just wants those two amounts. And then this is also, in accounting best practices for nonprofits. So the accountant did recommend that we remove that current language on funds because of that contradiction, and that could be a source of confusion. So also under the proposed bylaws, it's laid out how committees and other parts of the organization can request their own part of the yearly budget for their activities, with the board remaining ultimately the fiscal responsible body. Do we want to pause there for any questions or comments? Hearing none, I guess let's move on.
All right, so another sort of addition, but not really addition. Really, it's more of a rewording and clarifying what documents we need to have as an organization, is just clarifying the operational documents that we reference throughout the bylaws. So in our current bylaws, we reference certain documents such as ballot or vote handling procedures, as well as a document sort of that we need to have and present to our membership regarding dues as well. So essentially, we consolidated that into this section. So once established, any substantial changes must be approved by the Congress to take effect. And I think the thing that we're adding is conflict of interest, reimbursement, and compensation document, just to, again, sort of help clarify, if there is a conflict of interest, how do we even identify that? And B, what are the steps that we take to address that? For things such as reimbursement and compensation, just be helpful for the organization to have a document to point to, and help prevent, anything strange from happening moving forward. And again, this is something when we did our research regarding what other nonprofits in the United States did, this is something that was recommended and that a lot of other nonprofits follow. We also wanted to have a document that we could reference, and something that was a bit more official just regarding membership dues. So the membership committee has done a fantastic job of sort of outlining, these are the current dues that we have. This is how often people take these like certain tiers and whatnot. It's a lot of great information, but we thought it would be helpful to have a document that clearly outlined, what are the certain categories of membership dues that are available. And have this, again, we're just putting this into the bylaws that'll allow, and this will allow a little bit more flexibility, and then also make it a bit more official. And then we also wanted to have the elections and referendum procedure as a separate document as well, although we do reference these within the new bylaws too. But again, wanting to take some time to, again, consult with other, industry experts, as well as potentially with legal experts as well, to make sure that we're adhering to best practices that we have. And we're hoping that these documents will enable us to work with professionals and hopefully encourage discussion should any substantial changes be made. All right, and I see that Rafa has a hand up.
Yeah, so you distributed a link for the proposed changes and the existing bylaws. Is there some kind of document that shows the deltas, like that marks up the changes?
So we don't have that currently. That's something that the board is considering having, just so that we can. I know there's been some discussion regarding it would be helpful with those. We're figuring out what the best way to do that is, because we shifted things around, and it's not going to be a line by line comparison between the old and the new ones. But we are figuring out the best way to have all of that information in a format where people can compare.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect.
Any other questions on this section?
All right.
You do want to
I
move to
just
the
would
next
like
one?
to say, I would like to see the deltas as well, if some way it could be done. Definitely like going to the old bylaws and maybe just marking how and where they're changed. I mean, I don't know, I guess it would be an easy lurk, but I wouldn't mind seeing that. I think that would be really useful. Thank you.
I see Tim has a hand.
Yeah, so in that same vein, a question would be, why not just address the particular problem issues, such as the financial and legal stuff, as changes? Why do a whole rewrite that makes the process difficult to compare?
So I think there are so many places within our current bylaws where if we wanted to sort of address those issues, ultimately we would have to do like we did a lot of restructuring, moving certain sections to certain places, and then updating some of that language. But yeah. Brandon, is there anything you'd like to add?
I was just going to say I don't want to cut that discussion short, but I think since that's more of an overall discussion, we do plan to have time at the end for overall discussion about this. So moving on, I shared here a picture of the office building where our address is for the new central office. However, it's just an address. We don't have an office there. It's an address where we can receive mail. We have the option to have meetings there as needed, or use it as a workspace on an as needed basis, but it's not a permanent office. But that will be where we receive mail. So, speaking of the central office, the current bylaws extensively reference a central office and a director of the central office, but we haven't had a real central office since we left the office in Emeryville in 2013. Our central office has been a bedroom in Bill's house that he's been very kind to use for that purpose, but that's not really an office. So one of the proposals is to just not reference a central office in the bylaws, and rather than referring to a director of the central office, to refer to an executive director. That's standard language for nonprofits for their kind of primary staff person, in the case where they just have one staff person. For nonprofits that grow, their executive director is kind of the CEO, the main paid person running the operations of the nonprofit. So that is also highlighted in the proposed bylaws, that the executive director takes an active leadership position in the organization. There's also guidance about the employment relationship that the organization has with the executive director. And one key item is that the bylaws outline the possibility that this position might be empty in the future. Under the current bylaws, basically it has to be filled. But if we ever were in a extreme budgetary situation, or we just couldn't find someone for it, under the proposed bylaws, we have that flexibility. Any questions on this section? Okay, Q, do you want to move to the next slide?
Absolutely. So we also wanted to better outline what board procedure and responsibilities of members of the board are. There, it sort of mentions sort of hodgepodge, and it doesn't do a great job of sort of clearly stating, for things like when the board should meet, how often they should meet. Even something like what constitutes a quorum is not really in the current bylaws. There's nothing regarding meeting procedures, or even best practices for special meetings. And then there is some language regarding termination, but there isn't a lot of language regarding resignation, or addressing what to do if a board member is inactive. So we, looking at those resources that we used, we put together some language sort of outlining, how often should we meet, what does that look like, what we need to do if we needed to cancel a meeting, what's the procedure for special meetings, right? We don't want to be in a position where we're calling special meetings left and right and board members aren't able to attend, but we also want to provide flexibility so that if something were to pop up, we can sort of reference some more substantive information regarding what are some guidelines for calling those special meetings, defining what quorum is. And then wanting to also, this sort of links back to those documents regarding conflict of interest, wanting to make sure that we're adhering to those whenever we're holding a meeting, some language surrounding what we should do if there's, again, a possibility of conflict of interest. And then we also have language in there that would be helpful just regarding, if a board member wants to leave, or if there are other issues where, maybe a board member hasn't been attending any meetings and whatnot, how the board can address that, because that currently is not in our bylaws. Any questions regarding this? Or I should say any immediate question.
Should
All right.
move to the next slide.
Absolutely.
All right, so we also took a look at the process around the annual Congress and elections. This is from our Congress in Raleigh last year. So there are some contradictions or areas that seem like contradictions in the current bylaws, and I have two examples up here. One is that one of the ways that a bylaws change can be proposed is by the annual Congress, but if the Congress proposes a bylaws change, that will go on the ballot, that will be sent out and counted at the next Congress. So that would be a 1-year period where that bylaws change is pending. There's also, so the way that people can be nominated for office is either through the nominations committee, or they can be kind of self-nominated by gathering the support of 5 members of Esperanto USA, which seems like a good way to make sure that someone isn't blocked from running, or that if someone is interested, that they have the option to do it independently. However, the deadline for that independent nomination is February 15th, and the deadline for the nominations committee to report is March 1st. So that means if the nominations committee reported and someone saw, oh, there's not enough candidates, or I want to run against this person, or I tried to get the nominations committee to nominate me and they wouldn't, they wouldn't have the opportunity to use that that process at that point. And then also, as far as proposed bylaws changes, they just go straight to the ballot, whether they're sent by the board, a group of 25 members, or the previous year's Congress. They're straight on the ballot. There's no way to really debate or amend a proposed bylaws change. It's just, it has to be voted up or down as it is on the ballot. So for the proposed bylaws, we took a look at the order and decided it made sense to have the annual Congress happen first, and then have the ballot to all members, the referendum. So at the annual Congress, they would review the list of nominees for the ballot, which would allow someone to be nominated at the Congress. They could adjust the number of board members up or down by 1 or 2. If there were a lot of enthusiastic candidates, they could adjust it up, or if there were not enough, they could adjust down. The annual Congress would review proposed bylaws changes, which would allow for debate and possible amendment at the Congress prior to going on the ballot. And anything else that would need to go on the ballot would be reviewed first by the annual Congress. The voting on officers and bylaws changes would still be done by the ballot that's sent to all members. One thing that we considered here also is the way that essentially someone who might come to a Congress and get very excited about getting active in Esperanto USA then has the option to run for office if they felt so moved at that point, and if they could find people to nominate them. They'd still need 5 supporters for that, so it wouldn't be a trivial thing, but that option would exist with this timeline.
The cheesecake was good. Yeah. We had really good water, you know why?
Any questions on this section? Okay. Do you want to move to the next slide?
Right. And then another major change that we're proposing adding to these bylaws is just outlining the role that committees have with the organization, as well as what expectations are for those committees. So the current bylaws reference standing committees, specifically 3. So the nominations committee, the local Congress committee, as well as the tallying committee. But they don't really offer any guidance for these temporary or ad hoc committees. They just mention that they can be created. So we want to include something in our bylaws regarding how these special committees are charged, how chairs are selected, what the responsibilities of the chairs are, And we also want to provide them the tools that they need to be successful. And part of that is being the ability to request a budget. And these bylaws should support more successful committees, because then we can sort of say, hey, these are the expectations that we had for the committee. And this is, how a chair is nominated. And we also want to be able to review these committees as well, and make sure that they're doing what needs to happen, and that they're fulfilling what the original charge of the committee was. Another addition is the executive committee, and this is something that came about, again, through those resources. It's very common for nonprofits to have this. And this executive committee would essentially address the day-to-day needs of the organization, but would still, of course, be subject to review by the full board, because the full board is still, of course, responsible for the organization. And these bylaws would really just allow us to ensure that we're fulfilling, we being the board, are fulfilling our responsibility of overseeing everything that's happening, while also allowing the committees to have their own sort of autonomy in how they choose to fulfill the charge that they're given. And again, we want to leave enough flexibility in these, but we also want to make sure, again, that, as a board, we're fulfilling what we were voted into office to do, and what our fiduciary responsibility is as directors of a nonprofit. Any questions?
One point.
Yep.
One point that I'll add here also that's standardized is that each committee will be periodically reviewed. So currently, if someone is appointed to a committee, it's not clear for how long that appointment lasts. And so this would just make it clear, the board will review the committees each year and make sure that everything still is aligned.
Right. And yeah, this will hopefully add some more consistency, and also add a bit more organization to how we interact with volunteers and what those expectations are. Any questions regarding this? Okay. If not, then we'll move to our last slide. So now we'll sort of open it up to a discussion regarding, is there anything that's missing from these proposed changes that you'd like to see? Or is there anything that isn't clear or that should be clarified? And I see Tim has a hand up.
Yeah, so I think that some of these points are very good. We want the organization to be in compliance, follow best practices, et cetera, et cetera. My concern, though, is not some of these big ticket items, but some of the smaller changes that have slipped in that we've not discussed here. For example, Robert's Rules of Order was mentioned more than once in that. The age limit has been changed to be a member. I don't know how that will affect USE. What is Esperanto USA's relationship with UEA after this, given we've removed all of information or statutes around that? So those are the things that I am concerned about.
Yeah, well,
So
thank you. Oh, sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
yeah, I can speak to some of those. I don't think there's anything about an age limit for membership. We did review the age requirements for office, and in the proposed bylaws, it remains 18 for a director. That's the current age limit in the current bylaws. And we standardized an age limit of 25, an age requirement of 25 for president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Currently, president, vice president, and treasurer have a higher age limit, and secretary is 18. So the proposed bylaws have 25 for all four of those.
I believe the proposed bylaws says 14 is the minimum age to be a member of the organization.
Correct.
Oh, yep, you're right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And regarding UEA,
Yep, go ahead.
So, and sorry if I can just, Tim, you brought up an excellent point. Just how would this affect our relationship with USE? and membership of youth within our organization. Even though the age requirements there is now, if you want to be if you need to be a paying member of Esperanto USA, it is now 14. But the board does still reserve the right to grant non-paying membership to individuals. We thinking about as well, just in terms of wanting to keep our relationship with USE, which we currently, USE is a very interesting topic because we don't really have that much of an official relationship with them right now, at least not per the bylaws. But we wanted to allow flexibility where if you wanted to have a voice in the organization, you would not be, and you were below 14, you would not have to pay in order to have that voice, because youths typically have different financial situations than older.
I can also speak to the section about ViA. The current bylaws have a section about how we select our committee member for ViA's committee, which is that it should be in descending order of preference: the president, a board member, the director of the central office, or another member of the league, and that it should be someone who has participated in our annual congress and is participating in that year's UCO. That doesn't seem to me like something that the board has followed for quite a number of years. So it seems like something that may be too onerous for the bylaws to have that listed out in that way. The board might still have a procedure about selecting the committee member A. This doesn't not having it in the bylaws doesn't mean that we wouldn't have a committee member A. It just means we might have a more agile way of developing that process.
But we definitely hear you, Tim, just in terms of, and I think that this is something that merits further discussion, maybe having, adding that to the procedural documents where it's not in the bylaws, but it is referenced and allows a little bit more flexibility regarding, what our current practices are and where we hope to be. And I see that Haas has a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Q. I'm wondering when you're planning to have a vote on this replacement of the bylaws.
Yeah, so I think now we're sort of in the process of, as a bylaws committee, we got together, discussed these changes, presented it to the board, and then this is just one conversation, I hope, of many that we have with our membership regarding, what the end product is, right? We want to make sure that that there's transparency in this process. So I know originally I was hoping, this could be something that could be, by our next Landa Congresso presented to everyone. But I think as we've had more discussion and more conversation, we're definitely sort of reassessing and thinking about, do we need more time for this? There are other, just like Tim's comment regarding the UEA, and our relationship to that. Should we build that directly into the reference to documents that we have? So I want to say, officially there is no, we're not going to say, after this conversation you have 13 days or something to provide feedback and then it's going on the ballot. We think of this as a conversation, and within reason we want to do this in a way that doesn't stifle the ability of this organization to continue to grow and continue to serve its members in a way that's operationally feasible. So that was a very long-winded response, Haas, but ultimately the short end of that is we're not, as of right now, we do not have a deadline for these. These are just proposed bylaws changes that we have so far. I see Abraham has a hand.
Can you assure me that it's not going to be on the ballot that's coming out next month?
I
think that's an important point.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any promises, but I think that there's definitely more conversations that we need to have. I think the board is definitely going to, our plan is following this, present to the board what was discussed here. I don't want to speak for the entire board regarding that, but I do think that there's definitely more to be discussed.
Yeah, you want me to proceed, Q?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to commend the board and the committee on the simplification, the restructuring. Other boards I've been on, it really, really helps to have one place to look up something, to have one, one way we're phrasing it. Otherwise, it's just tons of time wasted in, well, what does this really mean? Or how does it really do it? Or two ways that it's being done, and both could be perceived as correct. So I think even if people are thinking, well, I'm not quite 100% sure about this, the way it is, like it makes it easy to change in the future by having one place where it's said and referred to. If you've got a definition, you refer to the definition rather than having 3 different places in the document where you try to restate what the thing means. Those sort of clarifications, and I'll have to read through the document to see if it sort of maps, but that general intent you had and objective, I think is really helpful for an organization to be, efficient and effective, and for everybody to understand how to be a good member, an active member, and to participate.
Right. Well, thank you for that comment, Abraham. And definitely the intent of this revision is just to, again, looking at other nonprofits and what they do, what industry standards are, just wanting to update these so that, to your point, if people have questions, hopefully there's one document that isn't too complex that they can reference. And I also do want to mention too that this wasn't just, at least these proposed changes so far weren't just the work of the board, but that we did consult with outside experts as well. Just thinking about, legally, is this something that's appropriate to put in there? And then all of the resources that we have access to as a nonprofit, especially within, I'm forgetting the name, California Nonprofit Association, have also been extremely helpful, just sort of what we should be thinking about when we're doing this. I see that ViA has a hand raised.
Yep, thanks. I just got a couple of points I want to make quickly. First of all, I want to be clear that I don't have any opposition to modernizing and revising bylaws as those needs become apparent. But there are a couple of points that I think are really important. One is the lack of a document that a couple of people have brought up. Can you hear me okay?
I'm having some difficulties hearing you.
It's a bit distorted.
Okay, well, let me take my headset off. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it?
Okay. Bad headset. One is the issue of the comparative document that Haas brought up. I have both documents in hand, and I have read both of them 3 times. The last time was early this morning, and it's impossible for me to track because they're structured differently. It's impossible for me to track what is changed, what is added, and what's omitted. And I think it's very important for a project like this goes forward for everybody to see those things. No ordinary member, I don't think, can look at these 2 documents and make those decisions very easily, intelligently. So I really want to push again for the need for that annotated copy of the existing bylaws that shows changes, additions, and omissions in some kind of clear, visible way. So I've addressed that several times. Go ahead.
I just want to ask a question, just in terms of what would your preference be if we were to send out this annotated document? Because again, there's such a large volume of text that we've shifted, that we've made some slight edits to. What would be the most helpful, I guess, just to make it?
I think you have to take the existing bylaws,
Mhm.
and in a parallel column, show those things that I just named. Changes, additions, omissions. It may have been a strategic complication to restructure the bylaws the way you did, because it really does make comparison nearly impossible. I have lots of experience with bylaws in other organizations, worked in management, and I know how to compare documents, but even I, with two relatively short documents, have a hard time making those determinations. And I think every member of the association has to have something in front of them that will make absolutely clear and guide that kind of decision about whether people are for it or against it. So I just want to re-emphasize that I think that's a very good step. The other thing that I became aware of this morning when I read the existing bylaws is that there's no provision for a rewrite or replacement of bylaw. There's a provision for amendments, but not for a complete change. And I think that's something the committee and the board think seriously about. My advice would be the first step should be an amendment that authorizes a replacement bylaws or a rewrite. Because at this point, I think the only thing that our existing bylaws authorize would be a series of amendments. I don't see anything in the document that says there's a mechanism or any validity for a replacement bylaws. I just don't see that. And I've looked at it multiple times and relatively carefully. So I would suggest maybe backing off from the idea of a rewrite or replacement and addressing individual points as amendments. And those are the two things I'm concerned about. Primarily the comparative document, but I think there is a validity issue or a legal issue with trying to do a replacement bylaws.
Right.
Thank you for expressing those, Lee. I agree with the idea of having a comparative document. Our goal was to make this as open and informative as possible.
Sure.
And I think that that's a great idea. So I think that's something that we can definitely, before any other official steps will be taken, the board is going to have to talk about what those next steps might be. But before or alongside any other official steps, I'm sure that will be included.
Sure.
And I think we can look at ways to make that as easy to read and understand as possible. Whether that's as you mentioned, having kind of a 2 columns thing, or maybe an introduction that explains some of the changes, or both. And I think we can. I would love to be in contact with you as we're looking at that to make sure that you're satisfied with how that ends up looking.
You know where to find me, so
yes.
That's not an issue, but I really don't think an introductory summary is what I'm asking for, and it's not what the members need. They need specifics. This is in the bylaws. This specific thing does not comply with IRS regulations. Here's how it's going to be changed or amended. This is what it says now. This is what's proposed. So you may have to take your proposal and reorganize it for the purposes of comparison. You can't put the two documents side by side as they now exist. But current bylaws are our legal document. And so whatever is being changed needs to be added where it can be seen in comparison with what exists currently.
Right. I agree.
And that's a logistics problem. It's just a matter of figuring out how to structure the information.
Yes.
I just want to jump in at this point and point out that we only have 10 more minutes and we have 4 people with their hands up, and also Thomas
I'm done.
in the chat that he would like to ask a question but can't get the raise hand feature to work.
Yeah, I wanted to speak quickly to the organization. We saw several sample bylaws from the resources that we looked at that were all organized in the same way as the proposed bylaws. So that was the reason that we took that structure of the organization. That's all. And thank you, Amanda. If you can keep stacked, that would be great.
I believe Carlo is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I believe that there was also a question about Robert Rules of Order, which I think that's a really good thing to choose. And I think this is I mean, I didn't read it. I didn't read every word, but I like the way it looks really reorganized. But I think that you might want to address that as well. Someone was asking about Robert Rules of Order that got passed by. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I clarify real quick? I believe where Robert's Rules of Order are mentioned in that document, we use the word that the board may reference those items. I know that was a subject of many discussions, and I think we settled on again, just because Robert's Rules of Order is something that is sort of the industry standard in nonprofits, we wanted to reference it, but we didn't want to be wholly constrained by everything that's in there. So we reference it, but we still leave it up to the board to determine whether or not that would be the appropriate use of Robert's Rules during whatever situation we encounter.
I've used it a lot, but I just wanted to address it because I believe that was missed in a previous question. That's all.
Yeah, Q, that is inaccurate. There is a piece that does say it suggested such as, but there is a secondary reference in there further down.
Okay, well, from my understanding, and I'll definitely relook at that, because I don't think that would reflect the conversations that we had as a board or as a committee. We left it open to may or suggested use.
Yes. All right. So you may want to read the proposal.
I think we need to move on to the next question.
I believe that's
a few minutes
show.
left.
Am I next?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yep. So addressing the idea of the being able to compare the documents, yes, I'd like to be able to compare them. I have a suggestion. I'm just going to throw it out there for what it's worth. We may want to do it in stages. We may want to have the original document and then have a document that shows all the direct changes that we can make line by line to compare, and then have another document that shows how everything got moved around, where section 4.1 used to be section 3.2 and section 5.4 is a new section, that kind of thing. And then maybe even a third one that says, based on that, we made some additional changes that you can now compare line to line. So you might want to do it as a multi-stage process and give us all those documents. I'm just throwing that out there as a possible suggestion.
Thank you. Yes. We'll definitely put time and thought into the best way to present that, and we welcome any at least the ways I'm thinking about it. I feel like it would make it more complex, so any suggestions would be appreciated and have been appreciated. I believe next is Locio.
Bona, I'll say I do have a question or a comment, but I will say really quick, thank you all for all the work that you've done and dedicated to looking at this. I really appreciate it. I've been impressed overall with the proposed changes, and even if a full new bylaws end up not be accepted, I would still like to see a lot of the individual changes in one form or another. I was just going to propose, I also agree, it's already on your radar now, but I also agree about a comparative document. But I would personally, I would like to see one that uses the new proposal as a base. And I understand that because that's not the bylaws that are currently in use, that doesn't sound intuitive, or I'm sure someone would shoot that down. It might actually be a good idea to try to do it both ways. Now, that's obviously a lot of work, but just personally, I'm trying to imagine, when I'm reading the proposed bylaws, okay, how's this all going to work if this gets accepted? That's going to be important. And I'd like to see it from the perspective of where did this information get sourced from in the current bylaws, just as much as I think other members want to see what did you do start at using the existing bylaws as a starting point. My only other comments are I really, really appreciate that the sections are named now. I think that the previous the current section numbering is more comfortable for some people, but it is not for me. At least having names to the sections, I hope those are kept, very much so. And I'm sure I had something else, but I can't remember, and there's a lot of hands, so I'll defer now.
Thank you, Lucia. I believe Haas is next.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to keep it quick. I'd like to second what Lucio said about there needing to be changes. I think we all agree that some amendments are in order, and I think some of these ideas are great, but I do find this wholesale replacement of the entire document a bit troubling for a number of reasons. One is that if you really are proposing to vote on this document next month, and there simply isn't time. In effect, it becomes a sort of simple up or down vote that you've already identified as a problem. I mean, we just got an announcement of this. I think I just got it in the mail yesterday. The documents, and even to look over the documents, one needs network access, and many of our members don't have network access, so they're totally left out of the process. And in comparing the two documents so far in detail, it's clear to me that the rewrite has introduced many new loopholes and ambiguities and strips out some very necessary fund protections. Not to mention some parts that I believe are just simply undemocratic. I see two options here for you. If you truly want to replace the entire bylaws document, it can't be something cooked up by a closed committee and then dumped on the members at the last moment. The process just needs more time, and it needs to be open to all interested members, not just a select committee. That means that any vote on a new bylaws document needs to be postponed at least until next year, at the very earliest, and preferably the following year to allow sufficient discussion and debate, because this is a serious thing. I mean, you can't just replace the entire legal document of an organization in this manner. It's just not appropriate. Second, if you'd like to propose more specific amendments to existing bylaws, as we've traditionally done in the past, then we'll need at least that comparative document that Lee was mentioning, so that we know what's been changed and why. I appreciate this overview of the changes, but mentions of like industry standards doesn't really mean anything specific unless I have an actual, have the actual details. They're just nice buzzwords. And preferably the document would have to be available to all the members, not just those online, which would mean preferably in the newsletter. And again, that means not just on the newsletter website, but in the newsletter itself. That needs to be published with enough time for all the members to meaningfully consider those changes. And again, that means it can't be done now. This has to wait. I'm done.
Right.
Thank you, Haas.
Thank you.
We have 2 minutes left, and I know that Thomas has not had a chance to speak and has been waiting for quite a long time. So sorry about that, Thomas. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. So one of my question, I think I have a lot of questions and I made some notes, but the overwhelming question, something I was hoping would get out of this presentation would be what motivated this. As I sort of followed the conversation, it basically started as, well, we formed a committee to look at the bylaws and change them all. Was there an issue that necessitated this change? Why was the decision made to totally revise everything?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about the future of Esperanto USA, just given my own backgrounds sort of in public administration, especially for me, at least, what prompted this was thinking about our relationship with committees, right? So last year I was named the chair of the communications committee, and there wasn't much more beyond that. So that was something even before, I considered this. That was a little, I would have liked more clarity within the bylaws. And I think that there has also just been financially some issues, especially now that we're consulting with professional organizations and sort of reassessing some of those words that we used, especially regarding the section with fund managers and whatnot, just not being consistent with what what the IRS needs, especially when we're sending in those documents for tax purposes, and sort of misunderstanding, regarding what level of oversight the board has regarding financial obligations and whatnot. So we really wanted to, following those conversations and research done by other committees, just going into, what do we need to do to be a financially sound organization? We acknowledged that there's a lot of issues you know, within that, specifically when looking at finances. And then, so looking at those two sections, also wanting some more guidance just in terms of, you know, what should we do if a member of the board resigns, outlining what are the expectations of board members. We wanted to have a document that more thoroughly covered those questions, so that it wasn't up to the board to sort of determine every time, well, this is how you want to do it, because then I think we sort of run into the dangerous idea of precedence. We wanted a document that we could refer to and say, this is the baseline that we need to start from.
All right, I think we need to finish up. We're 1 minute over, but Brandon has been waiting to speak, so let's let him have the last word. And then I just want to thank everyone for their interest in this topic and their comments, and the board will be considering all of these suggestions. So Brandon.
Yeah, just to speak to one thing that was brought up earlier, there are two references to Robert's Rules of Order in the proposed bylaws. In both cases, it uses the word may, meaning, you know, this is a document that could be referenced, but isn't binding for the organization. So I wanted to clarify that. Otherwise, I agree with Amanda. I think there's been a lot of useful discussion here. There's a lot for the board to take back and digest. And I really appreciate that everybody has been very focused, and I think it's been a very useful and fruitful discussion.
Yes, and I hope that this is one of many more conversations and discussions that we have. And I don't want I don't want to have to wait for like another Virtual Anto Congreso. So feel free, if there are more specific points for feedback, to email this secretary@esperantousa.org, so that we can review those suggestions or questions as a board when we're thinking about our bylaws revisions.